What if one whispered sentence could get you killed before breakfast? Not a fight, not a weapon, not a gang war. Just words, spoken to the wrong person, at the wrong time. Inside American prisons, there's a rule that matters more than any rule written by the state. It isn't posted on a wall. No warden enforces it. No officer explains it to you on your first day. And yet, every single inmate in every single facility, from county lockups to federal supermax units, learns it within hours of walking through the gate. Break it, and the consequences don't come from the guards. They come from everyone else. This is the story of the one rule that decides whether you survive. Prison culture runs on an invisible code, one that operates completely separate from the official rulebook. New inmates think survival depends on strength, or connections, or how tough they look walking into the yard. They're wrong. Survival depends on understanding a single unwritten law that governs every relationship, every conversation, every decision made behind those walls. That law is simple to state and brutal to enforce. Never talk to staff about another inmate. Outside, we'd call it snitching. Inside, it has a different weight entirely. It isn't just frowned upon. It's treated as one of the only crimes that can get a person killed without a trial, without a hearing, and often without a single guard ever finding out why. But here's what almost nobody outside those walls understands. This rule isn't really about loyalty. It's about something far more calculated. Think about what a prison actually is. Thousands of people, stripped of almost every freedom, packed into a space they can't leave, watched constantly by an authority they have no control over. In a world like that, information becomes the only form of power left. And the moment someone hands that power to the guards, they've tilted a balance that took decades to build. That's why the punishment for breaking this rule isn't proportional to the offense. It's designed to be permanent. Consider what happened in a Texas medium security unit a few years ago. A young inmate, barely 20, reported a minor rule violation to a correctional officer, expecting a small reward, maybe better cell placement. Within 6 hours, word had traveled through 3 separate housing units. He hadn't reported anything serious. It didn't matter. By the next morning, he was requesting protective custody, and he would spend the remainder of his sentence in isolation, unable to ever return to general population. One conversation, one irreversible outcome. And that's the part most people never grasp. In prison, reputation isn't something you rebuild. It's something you lose exactly once. So why does this rule exist at all? Why would thousands of people who have never met each other, who come from rival gangs, different races, different states, all agree on the same unspoken law? The answer lies in prison psychology, and it's more calculated than most viewers expect. Correctional facilities function on an uneasy truce between inmates and staff. Guards are outnumbered, sometimes by ratios of 50-1. The only reason facilities don't collapse into constant chaos is because both sides silently agree to certain boundaries. Inmates police themselves through this code, and in exchange, they maintain what limited autonomy they have left: control over information, control over the yard, control over their own hierarchy. The moment someone cooperates with staff, they threaten that entire system. They're not just betraying a person. In the eyes of the population, they're betraying the fragile order that keeps everyone alive. That's why the response is swift and often terrifying. There's a term inmates use for the aftermath: being labeled. Once labeled, a person's status changes instantly. Nobody has to announce it. It travels faster than any official memo, passed through eye contact, through hallway glances, through a code of nods and silences other inmates use to communicate without saying a word. Former inmates describe the feeling as being erased from the world around them. Meals eaten alone. Conversations that stop the moment they enter a room. Protection that used to be automatic, gone overnight. But here's where the story takes a darker turn, because being labeled isn't always accurate. In some of the most disturbing cases documented by criminal justice researchers, inmates have been falsely accused of cooperating with staff, sometimes deliberately, by rivals looking to eliminate competition without lifting a finger themselves. A single rumor planted at the right moment can accomplish what violence never could. No fight, no investigation, just a slow, calculated isolation that guards often never even notice, because on paper, nothing happened at all. This is the part correctional officers rarely discuss publicly. Many of them know exactly how this code operates, and some have learned to use it strategically. A rumor whispered in the right direction can diffuse tension without a single use of force. It's one of the quiet, unofficial tools of institutional control, and it raises an uncomfortable question about who this rule truly protects. Because while it's framed as a code of loyalty among inmates, the silence it enforces often benefits the system just as much as the population. Think about it. Every incident that goes unreported is one less investigation, one less use of force review, one less mark against a facility's record. The less inmates talk, the less oversight exists. And that means the rule against snitching doesn't just protect inmates from each other. In practice, it can shield abuses that would otherwise come to light. That's the part that rarely makes it into the popular narrative. And it's why understanding this rule means understanding something much bigger than prison etiquette. It's a mechanism, one that shapes behavior on every level of the institution, from the newest inmate to the highest-ranking staff member. And the code has exceptions almost nobody outside prison culture is aware of. Reporting a genuine, life-threatening emergency, someone about to be seriously harmed, is treated differently in some populations than reporting a minor infraction. The line isn't always drawn the same way in every facility, and that ambiguity is exactly what makes the code so dangerous. What's acceptable in one yard can get someone hurt in another. New inmates are rarely told this. They're expected to learn it by watching, and mistakes made from ignorance are punished exactly the same as mistakes made from malice. There's also a hierarchy within the rule itself. Talking to a counselor is viewed differently than talking to a correctional officer. Talking about facility conditions is viewed differently than talking about another inmate's actions. These distinctions matter enormously, and a single misunderstanding of them has ended more than one person's safety inside. This is why experienced inmates describe the first weeks of incarceration as the most dangerous period of an entire sentence. Not because of the risk of physical violence, though that risk is real, but because the code hasn't been learned yet, and every conversation carries a risk the newcomer doesn't even know exists. Correctional psychologists who study institutional behavior describe this as one of the most efficient informal social systems ever documented, more effective at maintaining order than most written policies. It requires no enforcement mechanism from authority. It's self-perpetuating, passed down without formal instruction, adapting to every new environment it's dropped into. And that's what makes it almost impossible to eliminate. Prison administrators have tried for decades to break the code through incentive programs, anonymous reporting systems, promises of confidentiality. Almost none of it works because the code isn't really about fear of guards. It's about fear of everyone else. And no administrative policy can override the psychology of an entire population enforcing its own boundaries. Which brings us to the discovery that changes how most people understand this entire subject. Researchers studying long-term incarcerated populations have found that the code doesn't fade with time. If anything, it strengthens. Inmates serving decades-long sentences report that the rule becomes less about survival and more about identity, an internalized standard that follows them even after release. Former inmates, years removed from any facility, still describe an instinctive resistance to reporting anything to authority, a reflex built during incarceration that never fully disappears. That's the true weight of this rule. It doesn't end when the sentence does. So when someone asks why prisons operate the way they do, why violence sometimes appears random, why certain inmates vanish into isolation without explanation, the answer usually traces back to this one unwritten law. A single rule, unspoken, unenforced by any written policy, and yet more powerful than almost anything printed in an inmate handbook. It decides who eats alone, who gets protection, who disappears into isolation, and who never fully leaves prison behind, even long after the doors finally open. Could you have learned this rule fast enough to survive it? If this pulled back a curtain you didn't expect, subscribe, because the hidden rules inside America's prisons go far deeper than this one, and the next one might be even harder to believe.